In the previous part, we left the flaming red walls of Thebes and Troy behind, watching two cities collapse under the weight of oaths, pride, and misguided decisions. In this part, we no longer stand upon the ramparts, but step down onto the dusty road, quietly walking behind the heroes as the war has already faded into the past. Try to imagine this. Night is late. The army camp has dispersed. The trumpets, the war drums, the battle cries of years gone by have all fallen silent. All that remains are a few ships scattered along the sandy shore, armor sets hanging loosely on wooden stakes, and men giving their swords one last careful wipe, blades that once were the very symbol of their pride. War does not end with a triumphant song, but with a very small, yet very heavy question. Now where will I go? How will I live after everything that has happened? The journeys of the heroes after the war are no longer journeys of men seeking glory, but the paths of human beings having to relearn how to live ordinary lives, to live with memory, with guilt, with things that can never be restored. We begin with the man who seemed to come home the earliest. Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the one who held command over the entire Greek coalition in the war against Troy. His name once weighed most heavily on the scales of power. He was the one who gave orders, the one who forced himself to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia so the winds would rise and the fleet could set sail. When Troy burned bright after the night of the wooden horse, Agamemnon boarded his ship with spoils of war, gold, silver, and a slim figure at his side, Cassandra, Princess of Troy, the woman Apollo had given the gift of seeing the future, yet cursed in such a way that, though she always spoke the truth, no one would believe her. All along the journey home, Cassandra sees vague images: blood in the house, a bathtub, a blade hidden in the shadows, the footsteps of a sleepless woman. She speaks. Agamemnon does not listen. Who would want to believe that after 10 years of war, what awaits at home is not an embrace, but a knife? Meanwhile, in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's wife, has lived 10 years with the memory of the daughter her husband led away for sacrifice. That pain does not wash away with wind and rain, does not dissolve with time. It settles, hardens, becomes a slab of rock deep inside her. Clytemnestra turns to Aegisthus, a man who bears his own old grudge against the house of Atreus. Between them there is both affection and a shared wound. When Agamemnon steps into his house, the smoke of war still clinging to his cloak, he does not know he is walking into a completely different land, a land of broken promises and long accumulated grievances. Some versions say that Clytemnestra rolls out a crimson carpet to receive him, smiles gently, speaks tender, soothing words, and waits until the moment he is tired, sinking into the bath, shedding all his defenses. Only then does she strike. It is a heavy scene, but what the Greeks preserved is not meant to glorify violence, but to ask a question. When the war is over, in what form do the things we have done for victory make their way back into our homes? Agamemnon does not die at Troy. He dies in his own house, at the hands of the one who once lay at his side. To them, that is the image of a truth. No victory is completely clean. The ruthless decisions we make for the greater good will sooner or later return to us, in one form or another, right inside the place we call home. But the story does not end there. Agamemnon's son, Orestes, grows up beneath that shadow. He loves his father, yet he cannot help but understand his mother's rage. As he comes of age, Apollo urges him to seek revenge. He returns, and kills Aegisthus, then kills his own mother as well. Immediately afterward, he is hunted by the Erinyes, the Furies, not because he killed a usurper, but because he killed his mother. From that point on, the tale of the house of Atreus becomes a long chain of deaths, one spilling into another. Only later do the Athenians tell of how Orestes is brought before a court, judged by a council, and how Athena herself appears to establish a new form of justice. No longer blood for blood, but law, trial, deliberation, and balance. The lesson is very gentle. After a war, what humanity needs is not more blades, but a new way to process pain. Not vengeance, but laws, dialogue, a form of justice not grounded in violence. From Mycenae, we drift to Sparta, where Menelaus and Helen return. Helen, the woman whose face was said to have launched 1,000 ships, also comes home, after a war in which her name has been attached as the main cause. Some versions say she left with Paris for love. Others say she was abducted. Still others, perhaps softer, say that the real Helen was taken by the gods to Egypt, while Troy knew only a phantom made of cloud. In any case, Menelaus still must face one truth. The wife he loves, the one for whom so many have died, is now standing before him. To kill her or forgive her is a question not only for Menelaus, but for everyone listening. The Greek poets did not turn Menelaus into a blind fury. They let him gaze at Helen for a long time, as if looking again at a painting that has hung in his home for years, but has never truly been seen. Then he lets his weapon drop. They go on living together in Sparta, not as an innocent young couple, but as two people walking beneath a very long shadow. No one can erase 10 years of war. But they learn to live on, not in constant suspicion, but with a certain acceptance. The past is the past. We still have to step into new mornings. If the story of the house of Atreus is a lesson that victory does not spare us from the consequences of our own harsh choices, then Menelaus and Helen offer another angle. There are wounds that can only be passed through by forgiveness. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is accepting that we cannot reclaim what should have been, and that all we can do is make the best of what remains in our hands. And then, on the far side of the sea, there is a man who cannot yet go home, Odysseus. Among all the journeys after the war, Odysseus's is the longest, strangest, and perhaps the closest to our lives today. Because he does not only have to overcome monsters, he must also overcome himself. Temptations, illusions, long stretches of drifting without direction that stretch into 10 full years. Odysseus is not the strongest, nor the most noble, but he is clever, observant, skilled in strategy. He is the one who conceived the wooden horse. After the night Troy burned, he should have returned straight to Ithaca, a small island where his wife Penelope sits at her loom day after day, waiting for him. But the sea is never a straight road. On the way home, Odysseus's ship drifts onto strange shores. There, he meets people who do nothing but eat lotus fruit and forget everything. If he stayed, he and his men would forget Troy, forget Ithaca, forget laughter and tears, forget who they are. Very often after great upheavals, we face a temptation just like that, to forget everything, to live a life as though nothing ever happened. But Odysseus drags his companions back to the ship, binds them to the benches, and sails away. He understands, to forget everything is not freedom, it is losing our very roots. Then he meets the Cyclops, the one-eyed giant who lives alone in a cave, eating travelers without a second thought. Odysseus uses his wits to escape, naming himself Nobody. so that when the Cyclops calls for help, his neighbors only hear, "Nobody is attacking me." He gets away, but before leaving, he cannot tolerate being only nobody. Standing on the ship, he shouts out his real name. That sound carries over the sea, into the Cyclops' ears, and from there to Poseidon, his father. From that moment, Poseidon becomes enraged and drives Odysseus' ship from storm to whirlpool, from one disaster to another. A small moment of ego, the desire to claim credit, to declare "this was me," brings 10 years of tempest. The Greeks tell this part with a wry, bittersweet smile. In each of us lives an Odysseus who is very wise and resourceful, and another Odysseus who is very human, deeply hungry for recognition. And the price of one boast delivered at the wrong time is sometimes far higher than we imagine. Odysseus continues to the island of Circe, a woman who can turn men into pigs, past the sirens, whose song is so seductive that anyone who hears it wants to drop their oars, past Calypso, the goddess who keeps him for 7 years on her island, promising him immortality if he will stay with her. Yet each time, deep inside Odysseus, there remains a single anchor point. The image of a small house, a young woman weaving a long cloth by lamplight, a boy growing up who has never once been held by his father. That is Ithaca. Many times he almost forgets that place, but storms, the warnings of the gods, and the voices of the dead in the underworld all pull him back to his original course. At last, after 10 years adrift, he sets foot on his homeland disguised as a beggar, hair and beard tangled, eyes full of lines. By now, the story is no longer about the hero's triumphant return and a cheering crowd. Odysseus comes back quietly. He watches the men feasting in his house, courting his wife, devouring his wealth. He tests Penelope's heart and discovers she has spent 10 years performing a delicate daily ritual, weaving a shroud by day and unweaving it by night, delaying remarriage, stretching out her hope that he might still come home. Odysseus's journey, then, is not that of a man seeking victory anymore, but of a man searching for a way back to himself, for his name, his home, the ones who love him, the ones who still remember who he truly is beyond battlefield shouts. Other heroes are not so fortunate. Ajax the Lesser drowns on his way home for insulting the gods. Diomedes returns only to find that his wife has taken another man, and that his homeland no longer has a place for him. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, carries both the light and the darkness of his father, yet cannot escape a sudden death. They are characters seldom told in full, but very close to everyday life. Not everyone who survives a war gets a happy ending. Some must start over on strange soil. Some never again find a place to call home. Some are remembered only as stories told by the hearth to the next generation. Among those who leave Troy, there is one hero of a very different kind, Aeneas. Aeneas is not Greek, but Trojan. When Troy burns, he does not rush to the walls for one last stand. Instead, he hoists his father onto his back, takes his young son by the hand, and walks through collapsing streets. Behind him trails his wife, but amid the chaos and smoke, he loses her. When he goes back to search, all he finds is her ghost, speaking words of farewell. In many European paintings, Aeneas is depicted in this moment, a young man straining under the weight of his aged father, his hand clasping the small fingers of his son. In the distance, the city falls in ruins. He does not turn back to fight. He faces forward. For the Romans who came later, Aeneas was the model of another kind of hero. A hero who does not only know how to fight, but how to carry memory, to carry his family, to carry the legacy of a lost city, and from it build a new one. They tell that from that journey, many generations later, Romulus and Remus are born, the founders of Rome. Seen from afar, we can hear Greece and Rome saying the same thing to one another. War may erase a city, but it cannot erase its memory if there is still someone who bears that memory forward and recounts it to their children. Sometimes, saving a civilization does not mean keeping its walls from falling, but keeping its stories alive. All these journeys, Agamemnon coming home only to die in his own house, Orestes trading vengeance for a new system of justice, Menelaus and Helen continuing a marriage covered in shadows, Odysseus wandering 10 years and then quietly stepping across his own threshold, Aeneas leaving the ashes behind to sow a different future, all whisper to us the same small yet vital truth. The hardest part of a war is not the fighting, but how to live after the fighting is done. The Greeks understood that when the drums have stopped, what remains is families learning to speak to one another again, fathers recognizing the true price of what they have traded away, mothers deciding whether to forgive, soldiers learning to lay down their swords and still find meaning in the rest of their lives. If we look at these stories as mirrors, we will see ourselves flickering in them. At times we are like Agamemnon, convinced that we are doing something cruel for the greater good, forgetting that one day the wound we inflict will come home through our own door. At times we are like Orestes, standing between two callings, to avenge or to find a new way to heal. At times we are like Menelaus, looking again at someone who has hurt us deeply and asking ourselves, do we want to kill the past or learn to live with it? At times we are like Odysseus, having left the battlefield, but still drifting among islands of oblivion, tempted to cast off our real name and forget where we belong. And sometimes, very quietly, we are like Aeneas, bending down to bear something of the previous generation. Our parents, grandparents, traditions, memories, through collapsing streets, just to preserve a small part of it for tomorrow. The journeys of the heroes after the war are not distant tales. They are the stories of anyone who has gone through a great upheaval, a breakup, a failure, an illness, a turning point that leaves us no longer the person we were yesterday. After each such war, we are forced to choose. Stay among the ashes, retelling only one old story again and again, or tiptoe out of the ruins, carrying whatever remains, a lesson, a loved one, a memory, to continue along the road. Night is now deep. The sounds of the street outside have likely faded. If you are lying in bed, listening to these final lines, I hope there is a very light feeling in your heart that these Greek hero tales, with their ships and gods and crumbling walls, are really whispering something very ordinary to you. No one is asking you to become a hero in the grand sense. But each time you pass through a war in your life, you can choose your own way of returning. Choose to say an apology. Choose to forgive. Choose dialogue instead of revenge. Choose to keep the memory instead of denying it. Choose to rebuild a roof, however small, in a world that has just burned down. And then, in the next part of this journey, as we move farther away from walls, ships, and even the heroes themselves, we will look more deeply into what haunted the Greeks for centuries: fate, death, and how human beings seek meaning, in a world where not even the gods can escape the flow of time.